critters, let's take a look at old school Reanimator. Now, if you're not familiar with Reanimator, the concept is getting creatures into your graveyard, preferably big, powerful creatures, and then cheating them into play. For that, we have All Hallows Eve, sort of the pivotal card in this particular deck. For 2 colorless and 2 black, sorcery speed, you suspend it with 2 time counters, and when the last one is removed, all creatures from all graveyards come back into play. Now, that's a symmetrical effect, so we have to find ways to get much more value than our opponents. And so later we'll see what kind of big old critters we can get back on the battlefield. Now, the other card we have for that is Animate Dead. It's much cheaper, and it targets a single creature. What's also noteworthy about this, though, is that you can target creatures that aren't in your graveyard. So if something particularly valuable gets discarded or dies in combat or ends up there in any other way, you can retrieve it. And that can at times be really powerful. One downside, our creature's going to get -1/-0. Not a huge deal, but it's important to remember when calculating your combat math and, whether or not you can finish out the game. Now, we have our package of reanimation. So the next part of our strategy is getting creatures into the graveyard. How do we do that? So next, let's take a look at our enablers. And boy, they are fun. I think the first one probably needs little introduction, as it's been a rather pivotal vintage card for some time in Dredge. It's funny. This card was very inexpensive for a long time, as its text reads: tap, draw 2, discard 3. So it's card negative. And usually that's not really what you want. You also don't tend to want to have lands that don't tap for mana. That's kind of their job. But at this particular time in Magic, they had quite a few lands that ended up being exceptionally powerful that didn't tap for mana. So Dredge certainly takes advantage of that, and in a lot of ways we're taking advantage of that in the same manner, in that, yes, we are discarding more cards than we're going to be able to draw with our Bazaar, but that's the whole point. We want to dig our way into our deck, find cards, creatures specifically, to discard, and then we reanimate them back into play. I would say you once you get one of these out, you probably don't need a second, and it's generally a good idea when you can to discard subsequent bazaars to the first one. Obviously, you may want to keep an extra just in case, it finds itself on the wrong end of a strip mine, or maybe a stone rain, or ice storm, or something like that. But yeah, just as a general rule, you really only need the one. The other card, and I haven't seen a lot of this in other builds of Reanimator, which I found rather surprising, because Bazaar is great, but that's only one card, and if you don't have it, you're in a lot of trouble. Jalum Tome is 3, which will be important later, but the 2 tap to loot, draw a card and discard a card, obviously very useful to us. We want our creatures in the graveyard, and we need to find cards like All Hallows Eve in our deck. And I suppose that's maybe something I didn't quite mention, is the digging for our key pieces, as this particular build is pretty focused on its combo. Not a lot of strong board control or disruption. In the main, we're trying to get right to our All Hallows Eves and other reanimation. We'll leave it to the sideboard to try and do more, but yeah, the looting effect is very efficient. I actually often prefer using the tome, as it's not card negative, and even on turns where you're not putting something into your graveyard, you're just finding more advantage there, and so that's really great. Now there's one more outlet that's a little I don't think it's usually thought of like this, as Recall tends to be thought of more as like a mega regrowth or something like that. But you do choose and discard cards from your hand to do it. So this is another great outlet that then can return anything we need. Maybe another All Hallows Eve, maybe one of our other utility spells, or who knows, just anything. So yeah, fun ninth piece of interaction there. Now, moving on, a rather unexpected card, I think. You definitely don't see this either in a lot of the Reanimator builds, but I think it's actually quite amazing. Sort of Dark Ritual on its own is just a really powerful card, 1 for 3. That is another reason I like the tome, because not that it's always the most ideal turn 1 play, but for all its power, Old School is kind of slow, so a turn 1 Jalum Tome may be the right call. A second land, looting away a big creature, and setting up future turns All Hallows Eve. And that's another great reason to have Dark Ritual, is because you can turn to All Hallows Eve, and if you have a Bazaar, you could very easily combo off with your reanimation on turn 4, and I certainly have. So I think that Dark Ritual as an include is surprisingly powerful, And again, I haven't seen a lot of it, and it kind of surprises me because it's really good. Now, in addition to the reanimation package, we kind of want a little bit more versatility than that. Just attacking from multiple angles is always pretty good. So, one other thing that Dark Ritual is great for, besides, our Jalums and our All Hallows Eve, is ramping out creatures. So now, get to our first big creature, Juzam Djinn. Sort of on its own in this format, it's a rather incredible creature. Certainly, history has outclassed it in so many ways. But one, we have pretty amazing art. Definitely one of the cooler 4-mana 5/5s in Magic's history. And a powerhouse at the time, and in this format, obviously remains. 2 colors and 2 black for a 5/5 that deals you 1 each turn. The Djinn and the Arabian Nights are relevant, as you can encounter a City in a Bottle, which gets rid of all Arabian Nights cards, or King Solomon, which can destroy Djinns. So minor downsides, but sometimes with this deck you're going to just Dark Ritual turn 2, maybe even turn 1 into a Juzam, and that is often all you need. He's such a powerhouse. But even if he dies, then you'll just maybe pick him up later, assuming he can evade a Swords to Plowshares and actually be in your graveyard. But yeah, the option to turn 2 into Juzams in this deck is another great option. And I haven't seen many Juzam Djinns in Reanimator decks, and there just seems to be a lot of great synergy. You do have to keep an eye out for that 1 damage, as there's not a lot of life gain in this format, and certainly not in Grixis colors. So keep an eye on that. But when you're swinging 4 or 5, you can generally get away with it, at least for a little while. So, the next creature that we have, Shivan Dragons. Another classic, another powerhouse of the format. And again, I really like this as a reanimation target. It's, we've got a big body, it's evasive, and yet again, you can ramp it out with a Dark Ritual. So, this deck really doesn't always have to depend on reanimation, even though that's our strategy. You can hard cast these creatures, evading post-board Tormod's Crypts and similar things, even though that's not, a huge worry. Like, I don't know that you're going to see more than 1 or 2 Tormod's Crypts in a sideboard, and only in a sideboard likely. And you can always bring in some Shatters or something like that, or just go off multiple times. Try, and if in the first All Hallow Eve fails, just try again. But yeah, and then we've got the pump. Like, you can really get in a lot of damage on the swings with these, especially if you get like multiples off an All Hallows Eve. Just great with the Dark ritual, and just all around a good card in this format. So, now we get into the really big reanimation targets. Of course, kind of, relative to the format. But I love this because I never imagined that I would be able to play Deep Spawn in a deck, and it's kind of wonderful. Actually, pretty decent art, I have to say, for the time. Well done. There's a little bit of argument as to whether or not Fallen Empires belongs in Old School, but the other name for Old School is 93, 94. All the sets that came out in those years, and as we can see, Fallen Empires was 94. So 8 mana is obviously crazy cost for this thing, but if we reanimate it really with either All Hallows Eve or Animate Dead, it's surprisingly strong. A 6/6 body with trample, that's already impressive. It's bigger than our Shivan, bigger than even Juzam Djinn, even with the Animate Dead. And that's -1, you still have a 5/6 with trample. It's pretty impressive, and this is definitely one of the creatures that we wouldn't be disappointed picking up with an Animate Dead. The second ability on Deep Spawn is relevant because it's actually another graveyard enabler. Crazy enough, we turn its downside into our positive. During your upkeep, take 2 cards from the top of your library and put them into your graveyard, or destroy Deep Spawn. So technically it is optional. You could let the Deep Spawn go, which is probably not something you're going to do, but you never know. It's an option in case your library is getting low, or for whatever reason you want him back in your graveyard. Now, the last ability I think is probably one of the more interesting ones after trample. There's not a ton of creatures with trample, so that's a really powerful ability. You're not going to be able to jump block this giant lunch critter with a bunch of tokens or weedy creatures. But anyway, so for 1 blue, Deep Spawn may not be the target of spells or effects until end of turn and does not untap during your next untap phase. If Deep Spawn is untapped, tap it. So for 1 blue, we get Shroud, and it taps. Yeah, and with a stun counter, basically. Not the best, but being able to counter one of our opponent's removal spells might be the difference between a win and a loss, even though he goes 1 turn off. But yeah, surprisingly powerful card in this particular build, and so pleasantly unexpected. Now, our last and probably the most anticipated reanimation target, Nicol Bolas. Back when he wasn't conquering planes, he was just reading at home. Definitely interesting card design of the Elder Dragon Legends. We had 5 of these, and Nicol Bolas was easily the most powerful of the ones, and he's in our colors, which is nice because even if you reanimate him, you're going to have to pay this 3 mana upkeep. It's always kind of crazy to think of how they thought of these creatures, where you need 8 mana of 3 different colors, and then still they expected you to pay more every turn just to keep them around. Well, that's just what we're going to have to do, because Nicol Bolas is a pretty big powerhouse. 7/7 flying, got that evasion. And when he hits your opponent, they discard their entire hand. So, once we hit with this, if you connect, that's usually the game. 7 damage and taking all their resources. This is yet another creature we're all too happy to animate dead, and it's kind of the basis, I think, the original notion that you're trying to cheat out this Nicol Bolas on turn. Well, make sure it's 3 so you have enough mana to pay his upkeep. Some lists run 3. I've chosen to run 2. He is a legend, so if you All Hallows Eve, you can't get multiples back. And really, even if you could, that upkeep, we're not a deck with a whole lot of mana, and so 1 is really all we could probably support, even if we could get multiples into play. But definitely 2 at least. You could play 3. It's kind of just up to you, but I've found that 2 works a bit better. Enough to find them, but not so many that they're kind of clogging up your other reanimation avenues. And much like the deep spawn, we don't really expect to ever cast Nicol Bolas. It's possible, but I wouldn't focus too much on it. Alright. Next, we look at the Artifact Mana Package. Quite wonderful, it is. And pretty standard. Just Soul Ring, our in-color Moxes, and Black Lotus. Now, it is fair to say that between all these and your Dark Rituals, you might be able to hardcast a Nicol Bolas in a crunch. Same with a Deep Spawn, so, don't forget about that. But, not too common that happens. I've had a game or two, but yeah, you're usually kind of in some desperate or strange situations if you're tapping for aid with this deck. I chose not to have the other Moxes. You could. I think it just felt like a little much. I wanted the on-color ones so I could pay upkeeps and cast all the spells, of course. Soul Ring, because we've got, All Hallows Eve, that 2 colors, or our Jalum Tomes, our Juzam Djinns, plenty of things that can benefit from that acceleration. And obviously Black Lotus feels almost pretty much an auto-include in any of your decks. But yeah, I think that usually gets us to where we need to be, and faster, much faster. There we're looking at our utility spells. Again, pretty standard, I would say. Oh, got ahead of myself there. All right. Time Walk, another pretty universal card if you're playing blue. Particularly devastating to resolve a All Hallows Eve and then Time Walk. Almost, I don't think I've ever lost a game where I did that. Such an amazing play. And obviously any turn, maybe you have a Juzam Djinn or a Shivan Dragon out, taking 2 swings with that can end the game very quickly. Ancestral Recall, our draw 3 for 1. Just the most powerful draw spell ever printed. Time Walk is 2, in case you're not familiar. Timetwister's a little unintuitive because it's going to shuffle our graveyard back into our library. You're asking, well, that's the whole point. We're trying to fill our graveyard. Why would we do that? Well, sometimes the game's not quite going in that direction, and refilling your hand can be amazing. We can take it from a failing game to a winning game, even though we are resetting our opponents. I think the fact that we have a more combo avenue to win with, this tends to favor us in that situation. And you know, if it's not working, you've got your Jalum Tomes and your Bazaar of Baghdad to loot it away. So no big deal. Demonic Tutor finds anything, it's in Grixis colors. It's pretty much another auto include. And then Wheel of Fortune is really doing for us, both halves of Timetwister, the part we want and the part that we don't, is replaced by two things we want. We love discarding our hand, as it may be filled with creatures that we want to put there, and then reloads us. So this is, after Ancestral, this is probably one of the most powerful cards in our deck. Always remember with these that your opponent also is drawing 7, so keep that in mind. Watch out for more removal, counterspells, and whatnot, so you do want to be mindful about when you play it, but it's still great. From there, we're just looking at our mana base, which is just the Grixis colors in duels. That's really all we need. We don't need a whole lot of mana with 4 dark rituals, our moxes, and everything. But, we've got a lot of little versatility here. All 3 sets of dual lands, 2 City of Brass. You could go 4. Again, there's not much life gain, so I'm always a bit hesitant to lean too heavily into that. And because we need a few turns to win with even our combo, it's good to be mindful. I've replaced 2 more City of Brasses, 2 swamps, as that's kind of our main color and our dark ritual color. But yeah, you could play for City of Brass if you want, or maybe another of the multicolored lands, if that suits you. Well, yeah. Thanks for taking a look at old school Reanimator. It's a lot of fun, and yeah, putting all those big giant creatures in play is really wonderful, along with getting to play with this wild assortment of powerful cards. Alright, thanks so much.